name is Harry Plaut. I did my film analysis paper on Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now, a little background. Apocalypse Now was directed by famous director Francis Ford Coppola in 1979. It takes place in Vietnam in 1970 during the war. It's defined as a drama or adventure film. However, I thought it was more fit to be more of a psychological thriller in terms of genre, seeing as it has to do with more the mental part of war. Some context. Essentially, it follows Captain Willard and his journey upriver to terminate Colonel Kurtz, who the military has deemed essentially insane. Willard was played by Martin Sheen, who was a pretty famous actor, and Colonel Kurtz is played by Marlon Brando. Central argument. My thesis. Francis Ford Coppola shows how the absurdity and madness of war takes a mental toll on those involved. One of the main things I want to do here was show how war has a really damaging effect on the psyche and how it really has an immense mental toll on all those who partake in it. One of the main things I looked at is how Francis Ford Coppola used light, sound, and plot. Concerning light, I really focused on how he decided to use darkness in terms to show evils and madness of war in contrast with light. Mainly, I'll be analyzing Chef, Willard, and Colonel Kurtz. Willard and PTSD. For the opening scene, Francis Ford Coppola decided to really overlap the sound of a ceiling fan with the sound of Apaches coming in. It kind of gives you an insight into the head and what's going on inside Willard. It kind of shows his cluttered brain. I thought it was pretty clear that Willard is already reeling from his past war experiences. Like I said, the sound of the ceiling fan seems to really intertwine with the sound of the Apaches overhead, which just kind of gives a look into the chaos going on inside of his head, essentially. Additionally, further along in the scene, there's a very strange scene in which Willard seems to be some sort of dancing ritual. Here, I'll show you. Now that scene has become actually quite famous because it turns out that Martin Sheen actually did punch a mirror and that the blood on his hand is real. But more importantly, I felt that this really strange behavior, possibly as a result from spending time in the jungle, was just really strange, and I thought it really just was so inhuman in my opinion. And I just felt that something so inhuman, I felt there had to be something wrong going on inside Willard's head. And I thought that the main reason could possibly be as a result of all the time he spent in the jungle. And I further analyzed this by stating that I believe it's post-traumatic stress disorder is the main stressor causing him to act in this strange way. Separation from wife. It is mentioned briefly by Martin Sheen in the monologue that following the war, as he came home, he kind of had a falling out with his wife. And according to the Journal of Abnormal Psychology, retreat from intimate relationships is a main symptom of PTSD. So I felt that could possibly be one of the reasons that shows he has PTSD. Chef. Chef is one of the main characters that we see PTSD in. With Chef, it really isn't until his jungle encounter with a tiger that we see any sort of change in him, but he begins the film as any other street smart guy. He was a saucier in New Orleans, so it's clear that he's a pretty normal guy. Now I'm going to show you the scene with the tiger.
They say you're throwing the meat. They call it boiling. I looked inside, man, it was turning gray. I couldn't fucking believe that one. That's when I applied for radio school, but then they gave me the engine with.
I just felt it was interesting to note how you're going to see a great amount of change in Chef's attitude and how he acts throughout the rest of the movie. It was interesting how at the start of this scene he was actually speaking normally, having a normal conversation with Sheen's character, and then you will see a change in his attitude following the scene. He repeats, never get out of the boat, never get out of the boat. As soon as this happened, it was clear that he was chock full of screaming and crying. Clearly there was a change in him, and I just felt that the repeating of this never leave the boat is really interesting because it seems to stick with him throughout the rest of the film. Additionally, in the next scene that I'm going to be analyzing, Chef refuses to leave the boat, regardless of what anybody says.
Fish? Chef, but fucking bet there's nothing on that boat! There's nothing on it, man! Get on it! All right! Move it! Mangoes! To the right, back. To the right!
There, he was arguing with his superior chief. Now, I'm not an expert on the army, but I know that whenever given orders by a superior, you always have to follow the order. So it's very interesting to see how someone in the army who's been drilled very hard won't take orders from a direct superior.
Look at that, Chef! Look at it! Fucking fish! More coconuts! Rice! Here's rice! What's in
One main thing that I noticed from this scene is the manner in which Chef acts while he is searching for God knows what. He's still yelling, partially from his past encounter with the tiger, and additionally, he's also just searching very quickly and being a little suspicious about his actions.
Again, check the yellow can. She was sitting on fucking.
That outburst right there is what I call the effect of the jungle. It's something that I mention quite often in my paper, actually. What I mean by this is that I believe that the jungle, the Vietnam jungle, has an immense effect on all of those who experience it, whether it be the violence, as Chef just experienced, or just the toll that it takes on you being in it for so long. With Chef, he was already harmed by his encounter with the tiger, and on top of this, that sudden outburst of gunfire, I think, really just shook him up. And from then on, he was just really never the same. The last person that I analyzed in my paper was Colonel Kurtz, maybe the most important character in the entire movie, in my opinion. I thought it was really interesting to see how Colonel Kurtz was often shot in a dark environment. To me, I thought this possibly represented madness, but even more, I thought it represented the evils of war. And I thought that Coppola used darkness and evil kind of jointly in order to show really the toll of the jungle.
Where are you from?
What I looked for in this scene was really how Kurtz was initially presented to the audience. Now, when we first saw Willard, he was surrounded also by some sort of darkness, clearly around his body. And when we first see Kurtz, you'll see that he's also surrounded by darkness. Whenever he's shown in this movie, typically it's within a cave or some sort of temple. And I just think that the shadow that always surrounds him kind of shows how he's hidden from the rest of the world. And I thought it should be noted that his environment was always very similar to Willard's, which I thought meant that they're both dealing with some sort of mental disorder.
I'm from Ohio, sir. Were you born there? Yes. Whereabouts? Toledo, sir. How far are you from the river?
See how his face is sort of cloaked in darkness? I thought that kind of represented madness in a sense. Even some of the most highly decorated soldiers could be turned mad by the jungle, essentially. And I tried to prove this by often taking note at the fact that most of his face is usually covered in shadow, which is something that you don't see with the rest of the characters. It's clear that he spent a little too much time in the jungle and that it really changed him. Because he used to be a very decorated soldier, and now he confines himself to hiding in temples and caves while essentially using savage tactics in order to advance his agenda.
The Ohio River, sir? Uh-huh. About 200 miles. I went down that river once when I was a kid. There's a place in the river I can't remember. Must have been
For me, one of the most brilliant things that I noticed in terms of Coppola's directing is how he really used the shadows and darkness. In this scene, you can see how half of Kurt's face is shown in light and half is shown in the dark. I really felt Coppola was trying to get at the morality in war. For a colonel like Kurtz, his goal is always to win. But I think that he proves a good point in that the line between good and evil, in war at least, is often a little mixed. One of the things that he speaks on is how the generals back home never cared when he was winning, but once his tactics grew a little savage, they wanted to terminate him. In this monologue by Sheen's character, Willard, he really gets at what I was just speaking about between good and evil.
Anyway, he knew more about what I was going to do than I did. If the generals back in the train could see what I saw, would they still want me to kill him? More than ever, probably. And what would his people back home want if they ever learned just how far from them he'd really gone? He broke from them, and then he broke from himself. I'd never seen a man so broken up and ripped apart.
I've seen the horror of his intimacy. But you have no right to call me a murderer. You have a right to kill me.
Often when speaking with Kurtz, Willard really seems to note how Kurtz speaks in these sort of poetic ways. Although it may sound beautiful, it is crazy and it is insanity. His tactics have grown rather savage, and upon approaching his temple, Willard sees that there's dismembered bodies and heads all over the place.
I have a right to do that. But you have no right to judge me.
In this scene, both are shown in darkness. What I thought this meant is that the evils or the darkness of war continues to plague them. Willard will end this sort of darkness around Kurtz by eventually terminating him. But I think that at the end of this movie, Willard still deals with this sort of evils that the jungle has basically put upon him. Impact of my research. Before doing this project, or paper, sorry, I really had no idea how light or sound really impacted the film, to be honest. But seeing as for this analysis paper, I really had to look at sound and plot and the light use, I really noticed that often a director can use these to their advantage in order to really set the scene right. We saw this with the ceiling fan sounds, with the darkness always cloaking Kurtz and Willard. And I just felt that it was really interesting to see how someone could use these elements to their advantage. I think from now I'm really going to look for these factors whenever I watch any sort of film. Difficulties. I had a lot of difficulties in researching just because I couldn't really find many scholarly articles on Apocalypse Now. But because I was researching psychological effects, I found some articles that gave me little bits to work off of, and I really had a little bit of trouble incorporating them into my paper in the end, but eventually I did figure it out, and I'm lucky enough to have the great resources of the librarians to help me out. And that's it. Thank you.
Great resources of the librarians, dude.